3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live, our Free Friday morning, where we're going to start trying to give content every now and again to the audience. And today, basically, what I wanted to go over is I have a lot of questions about how to mix skin tones, and there's a lot of complexity sometimes in skin tones, but I wanted to people just really don't know where to start. So I thought I would basically give y'all the colors that I use and the mixtures and recipes that I use in order for you to feel like at least you have a place to start. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and start talking about some of the colors that I use. Now, for a lot of artists, there's a huge variety within sort of the yellows, reds, oranges, browns, and blacks that people use, and there's really no wrong way, but these are the ones that I use and I find effective for how I paint my portraits and skin tones in my figurative paintings. So to start off with, I'm using an ivory black, and it is more of a thin black, and it ends up being slightly on the cool side, so if you actually added a bit of white to it, it would have a tendency to shift towards the blue. So it's kind of like a really neutral blue. Also, just to explain what neutral is, when I say neutral, I'm basically saying if gray and white and black, anywhere within that range is what I consider neutral. So if I'm saying I'm trying to neutralize a color, it means basically I'm trying to make it go more towards, shift more towards the gray. So the next color that I have here is my raw umber. And basically this is a very neutralized yellow, and we'll go more into why that's important to have. Also, what I have here is a transparent oxide red, and I have a transparent oxide yellow. Now these are, if I were to say what are the most important colors in my palette to have for mixing my skin tones, I would say 80 to 90% of all the mixtures that I mix for my skin tones come from these colors and adding white. So if you didn't have any other opportunity, you could use a limited color palette to make pretty much almost most of the ranges of colors and skin tones, from anyone who is more of a really dark color complexion, like an African dark color complexion, all the way up to a more of a Caucasian fair-skinned color complexion. So also what I use as hue shifters is I use Viridian green and a sap green. And then I also have on my palette, these are what I would consider some of my neutralizing colors for some of these colors, which is my cobalt blue, my French ultramarine blue, and then this is a cobalt violet. And then I have a alizarin crimson red, and that is a really good hue shifter when you're talking about doing warm notes, but also trying to keep it on a cool feeling side, because this is kind of more on the purpley range of red. And then I have a vermilion red. I have a cadmium orange and a cadmium yellow. And then this at the moment is a mixture of titanium white and lead white. You can use any of the combination of lead white or titanium white. They have tiny differences in properties, but for understanding the basics of creating a color range, it's really not important. You can use either. And then these I rarely use, but I keep them on my palette in case I just need to barely shift something one way or the other. It's a real pitfall to try to go straight towards these and go, here's the start of my skin tone colors, you know, and go through them with that expectation that this is where you should start your range. I feel like that will actually handicap you more than it would actually help you. So I'll go into these colors, but for today, right now, I'm not going to be using a lot of them. So I'm going to be using more of these to explain exactly what I'm going to do in my process. So when I first start out, the most important thing with doing a color mixing tone is actually establishing some organization on my color palette. And so what I do to do that is I try to create a range of dark value all the way to light. So one of my favorite explanations Michael uses all the time is that if this is your instrument that gives you a complete potential of creating most any range of color in the color spectrum, then what you're doing is organizing a scale at which you can have all of your color notes on, and then you can reach into those color notes accurately because you've organized your palette properly in order to be able to paint and paint more accurately. So what I first usually start with is I take I can try to make one ribbon of range, and this is going to be more for color mixing for a Caucasian skin tone. And I'm going to start with this being the darker range. Now, when you go down in the darker range, I usually put transparent oxide yellow, and I make a full ribbon of sort of yellows. The reason this is important is that for the most part, all color skin tone colors fall within a range of yellow to a very warm orange, almost into the red. So everything is in that range, and the only other difference is that it's light to dark. So this, or with less chromatic color, which basically means the intensity of it. Is it very pure color, which these are incredibly pure, very chromatic, very intense yellows and oranges. And this would be considered a very low chromatic and dark yellow. And this would be sort of a little bit on the lower chromatic, but not as low as that one, so that you can have an understanding that all of this still falls on a color wheel in a tiny pie wedge between yellow and red. So this first one is I'm going to go on the yellow side and create a color ribbon. So I'm going to first start by just kind of putting out some of my yellow. I'm going to switch to my larger brush to do this. I usually use a larger brush to mix. It gives me a little bit more paint on the palette. Okay. Now, once I've established that, I'm going to go up to my white here, and I'm going to take my white and I'm going to bring it down into that yellow. Now you can already see that I'm creating a value range here, but I'm going to keep broadening that range because it might be that, you know, this person has a really bright light on one side, but the rest of the room is dark. So if you have that light on one side, basically you'll have a really large range of light to dark on a Caucasian face. So on this end, I'm going to go ahead and pull the range even brighter. Now, for the most part, people's skin tones are just really not that chromatic. You know, there's a lot of things that can change your skin tone, and we can't really, with the amount of time that we have today, we can't really go into that. So if the light is a blue light and it's hitting them, it's going to shift the things. But what we're really worried about right now is how do we start? And so what I'm basically giving you is what they would call the local value or local color of a person's skin, and then finding a range within that local color. There's so many things that have to deal with relationships with the environment that you put the person in, and all of that can change stuff. But right now, just trying to keep it really basic for you. Okay, so now that I've started establishing this, I could dip just a little bit into the cad yellow and a slight bit of the cad orange up here at the top, and it'll just give me a little bit more of a chromatic range up at the top. And then as I go back down, I just keep kind of pushing that down in there until I feel like I'm creating a very consistent range. All right, now on the bottom end, when things go darker into shadow, they tend to lose a little bit of their chromatic intensity. So they end up getting a little bit more neutralized. So in order to neutralize that, I have paired these colors as being neutralizers for other colors I have on my palette. And cobalt violet is what I usually use to help neutralize a bit without getting too crazy, neutralize a bit of my yellow. And so I bring it back up, arrange like this, and it helps create this idea of a, go back down, of what would be practical that I would see, some place to start on a standard, and then I can use the standard to shift away from it. If I wanted to go even darker in my yellow, I go to my raw umber and I pull it through and just put a little bit of French ultramarine blue in there. And this really creates a nice range of my yellows. Okay, so now, like I said before, there's a big shift, or the shift in the color wheel is between yellow and orange. So now what I try to do is I try to do the other side of that range, which is basically transparent oxide red, and then I go up that range just like I did with the other one. And then I take a little bit of my white, start at the top, push my way into down the ribbon. Now, I'm using a hard bristled brush to do this, and it just gives me enough control for mixing. I wouldn't use a soft brush. You can, but it just would take me more time to do it. This allows me to push the paint around a little bit faster. All right, so this is now very red, but probably more red than I even need it to be. So what I'll do is my neutralizer for that I use is French ultramarine blue. So I go back down here and I establish it to be a little bit more neutral. And I pull it back up, and as it comes up, it gets a little bit more chromatic. I get to the top. Now, if I wanted to do a shift up here and make sure that I've got like my full range, I would take a little bit of my cad orange, a hint of my cad yellow, and this gives me a nice feeling of the skin tone. Now, as I start really painting, usually what happens is this kind of merges into each other, and this ends up being more of my yellow shift down into my red shift, and there's really no break in between the two. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to keep them relatively separate. So if you're working on someone who has more, say, of like a olivey color, like an Italian or like sort of East Indian color in their skin, you basically would start the range shifting a little more to the yellow, and a little bit more, the range starting more in the mid-tone, and then going down from there. So the only difference is that there might not necessarily just be as much of a high range, and the shifts might be more to a yellowy green and an orange in certain areas, depending on if you're working on the cheeks or the forehead. Okay, so now if I wanted to go any darker with this, I could continue to go darker, and what I would do is I would add some of my ivory black as my neutralizer. And that way you created yourself a pretty strong range. And then there's other things to consider, but like later on when you've actually started really playing around with it, and part of all of this is really experiment with what you like, what is already on your color palette. Instead of transparent oxide red, a lot of people will use like a yellow ochre. I tend to like oxide red because it actually is thin and it allows me to be able to, I don't know, control it in a particular way that I like to control my paint. I like the way it mixes with white and it creates a little bit more of a chromatic feel as you go up. So it's just how I like to control my paints. The other areas, I'm going to actually create one more ribbon, and I'm going to start with black down here. And I'm going to pull out basically a larger range of these between these two. And basically this is if you have someone who is very dark complected. I'm basically pulling out what I would use as their range. Go back into my oxide red a bit. A bit more of my yellow. And for the most part, I probably wouldn't get any lighter than that with their range. But the great thing is that that amount of range is about from here to here. So what I'm trying to do is just create a larger expansion, because when I'm painting on, like, say, a forehead or something, I want to be able to go, okay, here's going to be my lightest part of that, and here's going to be the darkest part of that. And so this helps me have that amount of range with a person who's much more dark complected, and basically control it over my entire palette. All right, now that I've established these three ribbons, I thought about just doing like a demonstration of a forehead so that y'all could see sort of what it is in action. What we're also going to do is I'm going to show you different shifts that I use within those, basically creating those cool notes, which are very, very important to complementing the warm notes in order for everything to feel better. What I find that people do is they go, oh, that looks really green, and then they just put a big swab of green on there, and it's too far shifted in that hue. What this allows you to do is keeps your shifts very subtle. All right, so I'm going to go up here and I'm going to re-establish. I'm going to basically do a Caucasian forehead, and then I'm going to do more of an olive skinned toned forehead, and then I'm going to do more of a dark complected, more of an African skin tone forehead. So I'm going to start up here at the top here, and I'm just going to say that we're going to say that the light's coming in this direction. So I'm going to say this is the lightest part, and then I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to continue to go down this range, and I'm doing just a little mixture between the two. Remember, this is the extreme on one end and the extreme on the other. So I'm just going to do a little bit of the mixture between the two. And let's say that it goes pretty dark because the light's pretty powerful. So I'm going to keep going down this shift. And I'm going to say the shadow starts right here on this side. Go down this level right here. And then I'm just going to work my way up this and make this a little bit larger so that we can just give a better example. So basically I'm establishing my darkest dark over here, which basically is saying that the room's going to be pretty dark around, and there's going to be one singular light source coming from this side. And then I'm going to pull up from there. And go to the point where it's really, really light. Okay, so if this was someone's forehead, basically, then there would also be like a really dark moment down here at the bottom. And now I'm going to just bring in, foreheads usually tend to be a little bit more neutral or shift a little more towards the yellow. But for this case, I'm going to just add just a little bit of warmth just to talk about that it's more of a Caucasian skin. All right, so the next part I'm going to do is I'm going to just work on what that next skin tone would be. Say that this is the person's under their eye, so that you can kind of get an example of what I'm doing. And this would be like under their other eye. All right, so now that I've done that, I'm going to go over and I'm going to do one that is a little bit more of an olive skin. Now what I want to do is I'm going to use a little bit of my greens over here, like my sap green. I'm going to just push that in just a touch to this red right here. I'm going to say that their lightest light starts right about here. And then their darkest dark is going to start down over here. And then it's going to go up from there. And I'm going to just use a bit of my cobalt violet. I'm going to keep pushing it over, working my way up this range. Okay. I'm going to go back down here and just get it a little bit darker. Okay. I'm going to come up to the top here. Add just a hint of cobalt, cad orange and yellow up here at the top. I just wanted them to have a little bit more color in that field, and if I wanted to and created a highlight, I could then shift over here and then get a little bit of this viridian green, and I could just put a little bit of a highlight right in there. Okay, so now this would be a range at which I would create more of, kind of similar to the painting I recently did of Divya, which I'll show you right here, where the skin tones are a little bit more in the yellow and orange range, and it's a little bit lower in value where it starts up here at the top. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but anyway, what? Switch it over to this one. All right, so where basically these are more of orange and yellow tones, and then it shifts over to more of using cobalt violet and some sap greens. What's that? What's that?
Put it in front of that if you can.
In front of this?
Put it like in front of the, like that, yeah.
How's that? Never mind, never mind. Okay, we'll worry about that later. So the next thing that I was going to show you is basically how to do the same thing with a Caucasian, or more of a very dark complexion. So I'm going to just finish that out as having a little bit of an eye socket here. Okay. All right, so the next one would be in this range. So I'd start here at the top of this range. And this would be up on the forehead. It's a little bit more warm. What I find is that in darker skin tones, they have a lot more warmth and yellows in the light area. And Caucasians, because their skin's so much more transparent, there's all sorts of more shifts towards green hues and neutral hues, because some areas are showing a lot of capillaries, and then some areas are showing a lot of like where it's very thin, where there might be a bony section of the person's face. So it ends up being a lot more of a shift towards a yellow, and then there's like some areas where the capillaries have a lot of other things going on underneath, and so like into your eye and tear ducts and things like that, where it might even get more in a shift of like a even like a blue or purpley hue. Okay, if that's the range, and I pull over. So you can use all sorts of color combinations, but basically this one will help you get more closely to where you want to go, at least give you a foundation. The other ideas basically is how do you neutralize some of these color shifts, and that'll be sort of the last thing I go over. So say that you wanted to create some moments where there's neutral in the yellow. I'll just use a bit of my cobalt violet, and that's going to help create more neutral moments. See, and what that does is creates an association that the thing that's in the light is more chromatic or more yellow, and that is a little bit less because it has less light hitting it. And you can also, another great moment, if you're working in, say, like a cheek, I use my vermilion to help warm up, say, a cheek area. So if I was to be working in this area, and what I use to neutralize the cheek is I use Viridian green to help neutralize my vermilion. So if I wanted the side to be the area that might be getting less, I would pull that through like that, and I would also bring it down in value. So bring it down here. And say we're going to connect this whole bit. And then I wanted to shift it more to where this had more of a warmth color. So to do that with this, I just start lower into this area, and I would pull the same thing across here, and that would help create that bit of warmth because this has more of that yellow hue. And then as it goes down, I would neutralize that with my Viridian green with just a touch of French ultramarine blue. And so come up here to the lighter part of the value, and say the bottom of their face, if I wanted the cheek to have the most chroma in the brightest bright area. And then as it goes down, it shifts more towards a green hue, which basically is more of a neutralize. It looks green because of the association around it. And then for more of the darker skinned, more of that African skin, it would be the same thing. It would just be shifting much more to the warmth over here. Let me put like an eye socket in here so that we can understand what's going on. There we go. So this would help you establish exactly what needs to be warm and cool, and then as it goes away on the cheek, I would pull more of my French ultramarine blue down in here as it goes further down. And right now, of course, these aren't perfect. We're just going over the idea of what colors I use for each one. There's so many ways of shifting all of this. You can use, alizarin crimson, and French ultramarine blue gives this another beautiful violet color that you can also use in your lower ranges for cooling things down and warming things up. But it's all about sort of the association of those skin tones, and this is like the introduction of really the basics of everything. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take a few questions or thoughts that maybe anyone has.
Yeah. Also, while I'm looking, let people know about Jeffrey's video. And
oh yeah, absolutely. So right now we are in the pre-sale of Jeffrey Larson's tutorial video for doing a still life. It's called The Big Look. If you go onto our Facebook page or our website, you'll see that we have a big pre-sale going on. And at this very moment, we have a promotional contest for it where we're doing a drawing for a free video of his. And the only thing you need to do is like the video trailer that's in our Facebook page, share it, and comment the word win, and that will submit you as a submission for his video, and that drawing will be announced on Monday, so put that in by the weekend.
A few people asked about your brushes.
Oh yeah. So right now I'm basically using just a few round brushes. This is a super range. These are some brushes that I might have just picked up at your local art store, like a Jerry's Artorama. These are basically just a basic bristle brush. This one right here is a Princeton Art and a brush company. I mainly use rosemary brushes, but today I just happened to kind of pull a few out. And this one's a silver brush, round, and it's part of their 1900 series, and this one's part of the Summit series. And all it is this brush that has a little strength to it for this particular demonstration. But I use soft brushes a lot when I'm actually painting after I've mixed everything.
Question from Miss Hodges Ross.
Mm-hmm.
So she says, you mentioned some people use yellow ochre instead of transparent oxide yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something people use in place of transparent oxide red? Maybe you could talk about
yes.
Why you pick colors.
So transparent oxide red also can go under another name. Burnt sienna is a name that often is referred to. I thought they were separate years ago, and then I found out that just different brands call it something different. It's the exact same pigment for the most part. That a lot of people would use that. You can actually neutralize other colors on your palette. You could take an alizarin crimson and mix it with a transparent oxide red, yellow, and almost come up with a burnt sienna if you wanted to. But for the most part, it's a must-have of either getting a burnt sienna or transparent oxide red on your palette, just because it has a great hue shifting strength, and it's transparent. It's a very forgiving one, easy to neutralize with French ultramarine.
Last question, the panel. I said it was an ACM panel, but
Yes, basically all this is an aluminum composite panel that basically I put a gesso ground on. It's basically, you can buy it at any sign shop, and it is a thin sheet of aluminum that has sandwiched in a piece of plastic. And it's really good, it's very cheap and really good to paint on. You just sand the surface of it, and it comes with like a white surface on it. You sand it down, and then I basically apply either a gesso or a lead ground onto the surface, and then I tone it with basically neutralizing transparent oxide red with French ultramarine, and I mix them till I get a nice neutral gray, and then I buff it over the top of, glaze it over the top of my panel before I start.
So this will be the last question. There was one that has to do with color. So
oh yeah, yeah.
hit it. One gentleman referenced mixing neutrals with the neutral red, yellow, and blues rather than the complements.
Mm-hmm.
And you noticed that you mixed a complement. Why do you prefer that, or what is your thought process?
So you could make it as basic as just red, yellows, and blues onto your panel, on your palette. The reason that people have more colors is to make the process faster. Also, I tend to like to mix the complements together to get my neutrals in order. That what happens sometimes is say, for example, transparent oxide red and French ultramarine, they create variance in the color when you're actually painting with it, and it just makes it more entertaining versus just one flat color. There's just a little bit of color shifting in there, and I think it's just entertaining for your eye to do that. And so I also do that with, like, when I'm layering onto paintings, I will do a base color that might be, say, warmer, and then I'll do a more opaque color on top of it that has a little bit of a cooler complementary color to that warmth, and that creates what they call this sort of vibration thing that happens in your eye, and it just makes a painting feel more entertaining. But you most certainly could do this with only about 3 colors, you know. Basically, I use my raw umber and my black as my sort of neutral yellow, and some people will use a burnt umber as their neutral red. I just tend to use transparent oxide red and then pull it down with French ultramarine. But other people will use a burnt umber, a raw umber, and a black, and that's basically your 3 primary colors that are very neutral, that allows for you to have your dark range, and then going up to your light of your range, and then using your you could use your cobalt blue, your vermilion red, and your cadmium yellow and white. And honestly, if you had just that, you could mix almost every color in the spectrum that you needed. You know, cobalt violet's a good one to have on your palette as well, as far as completing that range. But your greens, those are secondary colors as well. Is that all the questions we have right now? Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to watch the trailer of Jeff Larson's video on our Facebook page. And if you want to enter the contest to win one of theirs, please like, share, and comment on it. Also, if you go to our website and you subscribe to our website, the final day of my demonstration video is also, the final day is for free if you want to just submit your email there. So we look forward to doing this again with you and sharing a few more information, bits and pieces of information, and maybe we can go deeper into this in the future. All right, have a great day, guys.